What would you do if a single act of kindness, quiet, unnoticed, and completely unplanned, suddenly put you in the center of someone else's world? This is the story of a man who never asked to be seen, and a woman who saw far more than he ever expected. Before we begin, if stories of quiet courage, second chances, and the beauty of everyday love speak to your heart, consider subscribing to the channel. We share stories that heal, uplift, and remind us all what truly matters. Now, let's begin. A single dad repaired the AC and spoke 7 languages to calm the guests. The CEO watched without a word. The air inside Easton Grand Hotel was thick with frustration and sweat. Outside, New York simmered under a record-breaking July heat wave, but inside the grand marble-floored lobby things were boiling for a different reason. A line of irate international guests crowded the front desk, voices clashing in a dozen languages. The central air conditioning had gone down just as the hotel was hosting an international linguistic symposium. Fate, it seemed, had a cruel sense of irony. "Can someone please fix this?" a British man barked, loosening his tie. A woman in an elegant silk sari fanned herself with a tourist brochure, her face glistening. A Japanese businessman muttered, rapidly, his voice rising with every incomprehensible reply from the staff. Behind the desk, Nina, the young receptionist, barely a year into the job, was floundering. "I'm so sorry," she repeated again and again, her smile stretched thin. "We're doing everything we can." She wasn't. No one was. No one knew what to do. Until a quiet click echoed from the service corridor. The man who emerged looked nothing like a savior. Ethan Cole, in his oil-smudged gray uniform shirt and jeans, moved with the unassuming presence of someone used to going unnoticed. Mid-30s with tired eyes but a composed posture, he carried a modest toolbox in one hand and a folded maintenance checklist in the other. Maintenance. Nina called her voice a little too sharp. "We have a code, red, in the HVAC. I saw the alert," Ethan said simply. "Where's the main duct intake? Somewhere over the grand lobby." She waved vaguely upward. "But please, just hurry." He nodded and walked straight toward the utility access panel, his boots echoing on the tile. As he worked, the room continued to descend into chaos. A German couple was arguing with the concierge about their ruined reservation. A woman with a heavy French accent insisted on speaking to someone who could understand her complaints. The heat wasn't just physical, it was turning the room into a powder keg of miscommunication. Then Ethan stood up. He stepped away from the panel momentarily and approached the French woman. "Excusez-moi, madame," he said gently. "Je suis désolé pour la chaleur. Nous réparons le système maintenant. Vous pouvez attendre ici avec de l'eau fraîche." The woman blinked, then nodded, visibly soothed. He turned to the German couple. "Entschuldigung, die Klimaanlage wird in 10 Minuten repariert. Bitte bleiben Sie ruhig, wir kümmern uns darum." The couple fell silent, confusion and surprise, overtaking frustration. One by one, Ethan addressed each guest, switching from language to language as fluidly as a conductor shifting tempo, Spanish, Italian, Japanese, Arabic, Russian. He even joked gently with a small Korean boy by the fountain, asking if he wanted to help fix the AC. Within minutes, the noise had quieted. People were still sweating, yes, but they were calmer, united not by language but by the presence of this unexpected anchor in the storm. Above the lobby, behind a tinted glass panel overlooking the scene, Claire Easton stood frozen. She had arrived just moments earlier, drawn by the growing guest complaints and the breakdown alert on her tablet. As CEO of the Easton Grand, she had built a reputation for precision, efficiency, and keeping her distance. She didn't get involved in frontline drama, she solved problems from the top. But now, from the second-floor balcony, she couldn't look away from the man below. He wasn't handsome in the traditional sense, his jaw was unshaven, his hair tucked hastily under a cap, but there was a quiet dignity to him. And the way he moved through the room, steady, grounded kind, was something she hadn't seen in a long time. Claire tapped her earpiece. "Who is?" that she asked her assistant on the other end. Which one came the voice? The technician. Speaking. "What is that 7 languages? Hold on." A pause. Then, that's Ethan Cole. He works night maintenance. Single dad. Keeps a low profile. We almost didn't hire him, he was overqualified. Claire's gaze sharpened. Overqualified, PhD in linguistics, some university background. Left academia a few years ago. She looked again. Ethan was now back at the intake panel, hands deep in wires, calmly humming something under his breath. 2 minutes later, the system gave a low mechanical groan, then a hiss, and finally the satisfying whoosh of cold air pouring from the overhead vents. A cheer broke out in the lobby. Guests clapped spontaneously. Someone whistled. Ethan didn't smile. He just nodded once, quietly packed his tools and headed toward the back hall like a man finishing a chore. Claire remained perfectly still. The moment had been small, unscripted, barely visible from the surface. But to her, someone who had seen boardrooms filled with performative gestures and empty charisma, what she had just witnessed felt real. Raw, unpolished humanity. She didn't even notice she was gripping the glass railing until her knuckles turned white. Down below, Ethan disappeared into the corridor without so much as a thank you from staff or management. Like a ghost, unseen, unappreciated, and yet absolutely essential. Claire turned away from the window, her mind already racing. That man had just de-escalated a multilingual crisis, repaired a critical system in record time, and managed to do it with grace, humility, and not 1 ounce of ego. Who the hell was Ethan Cole, and why did she suddenly care so much? The next morning, Claire Easton sat in her corner office with the blinds drawn, halfway shielding her from the mid-morning sun. Her desk was lined with paperwork she normally flew through, but today her pen had stopped moving. Her thoughts were still rooted in the lobby last night. She had rewatched the security footage twice. Not because she didn't believe what she saw, but because something about it had stirred a part of her that had been dormant for years. That moment when Ethan had kneeled to speak to the Korean boy in his own language, just a soft-spoken sentence, a gentle smile, and the child had laughed, wiping tears with his sleeve. It stayed with her. Not a lot of things stayed with Claire Easton. She was a woman of movement. Fix it, file, it move on. But this didn't move on. It asked her to stay. She tapped her desk intercom. Nina. A moment later, the young receptionist poked her head in. Yes, Miss Easton. Close the door. Nina blinked and obeyed a little stiff. Claire looked up from her desk. You were working the front desk during the HVAC failure last night. Yes, ma'am. It was a nightmare, but it didn't escalate. The technician. Ethan. He handled the guests, Nina said, her tone tightening slightly. Claire picked up on it. You don't sound impressed. Nina's voice went clipped. He's good at fixing things, sure. And yes, the languages were a surprise, but I think some people are just good at putting on a show. He knows how to make people feel like he's some kind of saint. Claire frowned. You think he was performing? I think he knew you were watching. I wasn't on the floor. There are always eyes, Nina replied carefully. Claire didn't answer. Instead, she reached for her tablet and pulled up Ethan's employee file. Ethan Cole, age 38. Position night maintenance technician education, Ph.D. in applied linguistics. Columbia University previous employment adjunct professor language dept. NYU years with Easton, Grand 2. Claire leaned back. A Ph.D. from Columbia, adjunct at NYU. What was he doing replacing air filters and duct belts at midnight? She scrolled further and found a note buried deep in HR comments. Candidate appears overqualified but insisted on night shift availability due to personal schedule. Background check clean. Polite, quiet, respectful. Her fingers paused over a line, single parent. 1 dependent. Medical accommodations requested. Medical, she tapped again. The system, of course, redacted any personal health information regarding dependents. But her mind filled in gaps. She remembered the faint lines around his eyes. Not the lines of age, but of worry. the kind that deepens from watching someone you love fight a silent battle. The more she read, the more the story behind Ethan Cole pressed through the cracks: a gifted man, a kind soul, hiding in a job far beneath his capability. For what? The answer was obvious for someone he loved more than language itself. Claire stood and walked toward the window, looking down at the garden courtyard. A small group of guests milled about with coffee chatting under parasols. The city buzzed in the distance. She saw her reflection in the glass sharp-suit arms cross the image of control. But inside her mind was spiraling. Years ago, she had built her reputation on one rule: never get too close. It was how she survived the betrayal of her own trust at a crucial moment in her career. Empathy had once cost her dearly. She wasn't about to make that mistake again. And yet... Her gaze dropped to a maintenance worker walking toward the east building with a toolkit in hand. It wasn't Ethan, but for a moment her heart had lifted. That afternoon, Claire requested a service in her office. The wall panel thermostat had been running cold, and it was just the excuse she needed. At 2:05 p.m., there was a soft knock on the door. She turned, masking her nerves. "Come in." Ethan entered, toolbox in hand. His uniform was clean today, but his hair still stuck up slightly in the back and his sleeves were rolled neatly to the elbow. He offered a courteous nod. "You called for service, ma'am." She gestured to the panel. "Thermostat's been odd. Too cold. I thought maybe a recalibration I can check that," he said simply. As he walked to the wall, Claire watched him, his focus, his stillness. It was the calm of someone used to listening more than talking. "You were impressive last night," she said finally. He paused, glancing back. "Thank you. You knew exactly what to say to each guest." He offered a half smile. It helps when you know the words they need. Claire's eyes narrowed not with suspicion but curiosity. "You studied linguistics." "Yes." "Why are you here?" Ethan straightened. He could have brushed it off with a joke, but instead he met her gaze with steady honesty. "My son's been sick since he was 6. I needed a job with nights free and steady benefits. Academia didn't offer either." Claire's chest tightened, though she didn't show it. "I'm sorry to hear that." He shrugged gently. "He's the strongest person I know. Makes this..." He gestured around the room. "Easy." They stood in silence. For a long moment, nothing moved but the quiet hum of the building. Claire studied him not as an employee but as a man. There was no bitterness in him, no resentment, just quiet resilience. "You fixed the thermostat," he said, turning back to the panel. "You just didn't know it." She raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "You made the call." "That's the first step." And with that, he packed his tools and left the door clicking softly behind him. Claire remained standing for a long while, staring at the thermostat. The temperature in the room hadn't changed, but something in her had. By the time the next evening settled over Manhattan, the Easton Grand had returned to its smooth, polished rhythm. The symphony of clinking glasses in the rooftop bar, the soft hush of elevator doors opening and closing, the subtle nods of bellmen in black vests, all signs that the machine was working again. But Claire Easton's thoughts were anything but smooth. She sat at the end of a long conference table in a closed executive boardroom, barely hearing a word her assistant was saying about vendor contracts. A name kept echoing in her mind like a half-forgotten tune: Ethan Cole. She had built her entire brand on understanding systems, business models, interpersonal dynamics, risk matrices. But this man, he didn't fit into any matrix. He didn't demand attention. He didn't maneuver for opportunity. He simply existed, quiet, capable, invisible. And that made him impossible to ignore. "Cancel the 11 a.m. site visit tomorrow," Claire said suddenly. Her assistant blinked. "Would you like me to reschedule?" "No," Claire said, standing. "I'll be handling something personally." The following day, Claire appeared in the Lower East Wing unannounced, clipboard in hand, wearing a simple slate blue blouse instead of her usual blazer. She told the front desk she wanted to observe infrastructure alignment firsthand, which sounded technical enough to avoid questions. But really, she just wanted to see him work, without the scripted performance of a request, without the forced politeness of a meeting. Just the man behind the tools. She found him on the service floor inspecting a junction box near the back kitchen. He wore the same work uniform, slightly frayed at the collar, but there was something almost meditative in how he moved, checking, adjusting, double-checking. Alone, unnoticed. Claire stood back, arms crossed, observing for a full minute before speaking. Not many people triple-test voltage, she said. Ethan didn't jump. He looked up, recognizing her instantly, but his expression remained even. I've learned it's better to check 3 times than explain once why something exploded. A faint smile crept into her lips. You have a way with words. It was a past life, he replied, closing the panel and standing. They began walking together down the corridor. Claire noticed that every time someone passed another employee, a cleaner, a chef, Ethan nodded or greeted them. No one flinched. No one feared him. And yet no one seemed to fully see him either. You really did teach, she asked, almost hesitant. For about 7 years. Columbia, then NYU. I loved it. But things changed. Because of your son, Ethan gave a small nod. Leo was diagnosed with primary immunodeficiency. Lots of hospital visits. Lots of uncertainty. The university didn't exactly love unpredictable schedules. Claire was silent. She could imagine the boardrooms, the meetings, the silent reshuffling of courses until his were the first to go. I'm sorry, she said softly. Don't be, Ethan replied, not bitter. I get to walk my son to school every morning. That's worth more than tenure. Claire's throat tightened at the casual strength in his voice. They entered the service stairwell and climbed toward the rooftop maintenance corridor. Claire paused on the landing and looked at him. Why not tell people what you've done? Your degrees, your background. Ethan shrugged. Because it's not who I am now, and if I talk about it too much, I might start missing it. Claire swallowed, feeling something shift in her chest. They reached the rooftop access. Wind rushed around them as the door swung open. The city sprawled before them, alive, pulsing. Ethan stood by the cooling tower checking pressure gauges. Claire stayed back watching the skyline. I used to think the higher up you went, the clearer the view got, she said. Ethan turned to her. And turns out it's just more noise. You just stop hearing the people at the bottom. He studied her. You don't seem like someone who forgets where she came from. Claire smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. You'd be surprised. They stood in quiet for a moment, the wind tugging at their clothes, the rooftop humming with quiet machinery. Then Ethan spoke, not looking at her. Claire, why are you really here? It wasn't rude. It wasn't presumptuous. It was just honest. She took a breath. Because last night, I saw something that reminded me of what this place is supposed to be. He tilted his head. A hotel at its best is more than chandeliers and 5-star menus. It's a safe place for people who are far from home, and you somehow made people feel that, with a wrench in one hand and 7 languages in your back pocket. Ethan looked down, almost embarrassed. You reminded me, she said, that connection doesn't come from position. It comes from presence. Their eyes met then. No romance, no subtext. Just human recognition, deep and real. He cleared his throat. Do you want to meet? Leo Claire blinked. Now. After my shift. We always get milkshakes on Fridays. He'll like you. He thinks people who wear heels are probably superheroes. A surprised laugh escaped her. That's a first. I told him you were my boss. He asked if you could speak alien. I said we'd find out. Claire grinned. Then I suppose I have a standard to meet. Ethan nodded, smiling. Meet us at the corner diner. 6 o'clock. She hesitated, but then nodded softly. All right. As they walked back inside, Claire felt something she hadn't in years. A beginning. Not of a romance. Not yet. But of trust. And in her world that was rarer than love. The bell above the door chimed as Claire stepped into the small corner diner, her heels tapping softly against the checkered floor. It was the kind of place that hadn't changed in decades. Vinyl booths, a jukebox in the corner, and a waitress with a name tag that read Bev in cursive. She was 5 minutes early. She chose a booth by the window, adjusting her blazer. The city buzzed outside, golden hour stretching long shadows down the street. For a brief moment, Claire wondered if she had made a mistake, if this was too personal too soon. She wasn't accustomed to blurring lines. But then the door opened again, and Ethan walked in. He wasn't in uniform this time. Just a plain navy t-shirt and jeans, worn but clean. His hair was slightly damp, as though he'd rushed a quick shower after his shift. At his side was a boy, maybe 10 years old, with sandy brown hair, large eyes, and a red NASA cap that was a size too big. Claire stood. Ethan smiled. "Claire, this is Leo. Leo, this is Ms. Easton." Leo looked up at her wide-eyed. "You're the boss of everything." Claire crouched, slightly amused. "Only the elevators and the scrambled eggs." The boy grinned. They slid into the booth, Leo between them, already pulling a laminated menu toward him. "I'm allowed to order anything," he declared, "even pancakes for dinner." Ethan shot Claire a look. "One night a week, I lose jurisdiction." Claire smiled. "Seems fair." They ordered milkshakes, vanilla for Leo, chocolate for Ethan, and strawberry for Claire, and pancakes for the table to share. The moment the waitress left, Leo leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Dad said you know about languages," he said. "Do you speak alien?" Claire played along. "Only on Wednesdays." Leo tilted his head. "What about cat?" "Just the attitude, not the grammar." The boy laughed, a bright, unfiltered sound. Claire felt it ripple through her, unexpectedly warm. For the next half hour, the conversation flowed like something from another life. Claire found herself answering Leo's riddles, joining Ethan in a back and forth on the quirks of language like why read and read look the same but sound different, and even listening as Leo proudly recited the names of all 8 planets plus Pluto, just in case it makes a comeback. But in the lulls between laughter and syrup, Claire watched Ethan with growing admiration. He never interrupted his son, never dismissed a question. When Leo's hand trembled slightly while holding his glass, Ethan subtly steadied it without making a fuss. And when the boy coughed halfway through a laugh, Ethan's hand instinctively reached into his backpack for a small inhaler. It was seamless, practiced, tender. Leo, Claire said gently, "Your dad tells me you're very brave." The boy tilted his head. "Because of the hospitals, because of everything," she said. "Most kids your age don't know what it means to stay strong." Leo shrugged. "I just get tired sometimes. But Dad says we're a team." Claire glanced at Ethan, whose expression was quiet but fierce. "And what about your mom?" she asked softly. Leo's eyes dropped. He stirred his milkshake with his straw. "She passed away when he was 3, Ethan said after a pause. "Leukemia." Claire's chest tightened. "I told him she still listens," Ethan added. "So sometimes he leaves messages for her." Leo perked up. "I wrote one last week in 4 languages. Yeah, English, French, Spanish, and emoji." Claire laughed gently. "That's universal." Ethan reached across the table and ruffled Leo's hair. When the bill came, Claire tried to reach for it, but Ethan stopped her with a shake of his head. "Friday night pancakes are on me." She didn't argue. Something about the moment felt too whole to spoil with polite power games. As they stepped outside, the sky was turning deep blue, the city lights blinking to life like fireflies. Leo skipped ahead to the corner, pointing at a mural painted on the side of a building. "I like her," he told Ethan, not quietly. Claire chuckled. "I'm standing right here, you know." Leo grinned. "Good. You should know." Ethan looked at her a little embarrassed, but mostly proud. Claire turned to him. "Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for saying yes." They stood there for a breath too long. Not romantic, not yet, but real. Something between them had shifted gently, quietly, like soil parting for a seed to grow. Before she could speak again, Leo returned, taking his father's hand and yawning. "Big day tomorrow," Ethan said. "Leo has an allergy consult." Claire nodded, stepping back. "Let me know if I can help." He hesitated. "Actually, there might be something." She looked at him, curious. "There's a trial program. Immune therapy. It's expensive, and the wait list is brutal. But if I could just get him on the radar?" Claire didn't speak. She reached into her purse, pulled out a business card, and scribbled something on the back. "Call this number tomorrow morning. Use my name." Ethan blinked. "Claire, it's not charity," she said firmly. "It's what people do when they care." He looked at her for a long moment. "Thank you." Claire nodded. "Good night, Leo." The boy waved, already leaning into his father's side. Claire turned and walked down the street, heart both lighter and heavier. Somewhere in her chest, where ambition used to be sharp-edged and cold, something softer had begun to take root. She didn't know where it would lead, but for the first time in years she wanted to follow it. The storm didn't arrive with thunder. It crept in quietly the way real storms often do inside people, not in the sky. For Claire Easton, it started with a boardroom meeting. Rain tapped against the panoramic windows of the Easton Grand's 27th floor executive suite as Claire sat at the head of the long lacquered table. Her senior team flanked her on both sides. Laptops glowed, coffee steamed, smiles were stiff. But Claire's focus was elsewhere, on a name highlighted in a report on her screen. Ethan Cole, status: part-time, non-essential operations staff. Suggested for inclusion in Automation Restructuring Phase 2, we can reduce labor costs by nearly 12% if we transition all routine systems checks to AI-assisted diagnostics and automated maintenance alerts, one of the directors was saying. It's already being piloted in our Chicago location. Claire blinked, coming back to the moment. "And that would replace whom exactly?" "Primarily night shift maintenance," the man replied. "Techs like Ethan Cole." There it was, spoken out loud, like a verdict. Claire kept her face neutral. "Is this being proposed across the entire chain?" "Yeah, we've identified a list of candidates whose tasks are 85% automatable." Another director chimed in, nodding. "They're great people, but we're running a business, not a charity." The words hit her like a slap, though she didn't flinch. She stared at the glowing screen. Ethan's name. Leo's face flashing in her mind, laughing over pancakes, asking if she spoke alien, waving goodnight like she was someone who might matter. Claire felt a cold knot twist in her stomach. She knew what she should say. Approve the proposal. Stay neutral. Follow the model. No personal exceptions. But she also remembered what Ethan had said that night on the rooftop. "If I talk about it too much, I might start missing it." Claire closed the report. "We'll revisit this next quarter," she said sharply. A few people exchanged glances. Ms. Easton. "We've had no system failures under Mr. Cole's watch in 2 years. Customer satisfaction has remained high. The incident last week was handled better by him than by our own front desk. He's not non-essential. He's the reason our brand still means something." The room went silent. Rain continued its soft percussion outside. Claire stood, meeting adjourned. That evening, she didn't go home. She didn't go to the gym or the rooftop lounge or the endless list of places she used to go when she needed to feel in control. Instead, she walked the quieter halls of the hotel's lower levels, the heartbeat of the building, pipes, boilers, buzzing circuits. And she found herself outside the custodial break room, a humble, windowless space that smelled faintly of coffee and metal. Inside, Ethan was sitting alone, eating from a plastic container. A tablet rested beside him, open to a medical journal. He looked up, surprised. "Claire." She stepped in and closed the door behind her. "You read immunology papers on your break." He gave a small smile. "Helps me feel less helpless." Claire hesitated, then sat across from him. "They want to automate your position," she said, skipping all pretense. Ethan didn't look surprised. I figured. You're not just a cog in the machine. I know, he said gently. But I also know I don't get to ask for exceptions. Not when the world's chasing margins. Claire looked down at her hands. She hadn't worn her rings today. It made her feel strangely bare. I pushed it back, she said. But it won't hold forever. The numbers, they don't care about values. Ethan's voice was quiet. Then make the numbers care. She looked at him. Use me, he continued. Put me where people see what it means to choose humans over machines. Train staff. Speak to guests. Build programs that only a person can deliver. Claire blinked. You want to stay and do more. I want to matter. And I want Leo to see me doing something that matters. The simplicity of it. His clarity tore through her. I don't know if I can protect you in the long term, she whispered. I'm not asking for protection, he said. I'm asking for purpose. Silence. Thick but not heavy. Like something being reforged in fire. Claire stood. Let me think. Ethan nodded. But before she left, she turned back. I had a father who chose the business over family. He thought success made up for absence. Ethan tilted his head. Claire met his eyes. You're the first man I've met who gave up success to be present, and I've never admired anything more. Then she was gone. The next morning, the storm hit hard this time, literally. A city-wide blackout triggered by a grid overload during an early spring heat wave. Elevators froze. Backups failed. Guests panicked. Chaos brewed again in the Easton Grand's gilded halls. But this time, Ethan was ready. While management scrambled, he led a crew of 3 junior techs calming guests in 4 languages, setting up emergency lights and manually rebooting elevator systems. In the middle of it all, he paused to reassure a nervous child trapped on the 3rd floor with a whispered story about how power comes back faster when we stay brave. Claire watched the whole thing from the mezzanine, hands gripping the railing, heart pounding, not in fear, but awe. He wasn't dramatic. He wasn't flashy. He just showed up. Again. For strangers. For her brand. For his son. For truth. By the time power returned, several guests were asking who he was. Someone called him the calm in the storm. Claire smiled. They had no idea just how true that was. The next morning, Ethan woke before the alarm the way he always did. He didn't need a clock anymore. His body moved on instinct, now calibrated by hospital visits, Leo's school schedule, and late-night maintenance calls. His small apartment was still and dim, the first light of dawn sliding across the hardwood floor like a quiet visitor. He tiptoed into the kitchen and brewed a modest cup of coffee. From the bedroom came the soft rustle of sheets and the faint wheezy breathing of a child still asleep. Leo had a checkup later that afternoon. Ethan had taken the day off. It wasn't optional. He never missed doctor days, even if it meant dipping into unpaid leave, even if it meant choosing between groceries and medication later. As he sipped his coffee, a notification pinged on his phone. It was from the Easton Grand HR portal. Routine system update, it read. But something about it made his stomach twist. He didn't open it. Instead, he packed Leo's backpack with snacks and the latest illustrated encyclopedia about space, then carefully folded the appointment papers into his worn canvas bag. The insurance claim form fluttered out and landed on the counter. Pending. Still. Across the city, in a private office 3 floors above the Easton Grand lobby, Claire was on the phone with a man named Dr. Kent Holloway, the director of pediatric immunology at the Stanton Research Center. I'm not asking for a handout, she said firmly. I'm offering a referral. On the other end, Holloway hesitated. Claire, our clinical trials are at capacity. These cases are reviewed by board vote. The waiting list is 6 months minimum. He's 10 years old, Kent, she said, her voice sharpening. He's smart. He's curious, and his father is raising him alone while working night shifts to pay for inhalers. If he doesn't belong in your trial, then the system is broken. A pause. Then I can send his file for a secondary review, Holloway said quietly. unofficially. "But I can't promise anything." "I don't need a promise," Claire replied. "Just a door not locked shut." She hung up, fingers tight around her phone, the weight of the world heavier than her tailored blazer. For a woman used to commanding boardrooms and restructuring budgets in her sleep, this was different. This was personal. And for the first time, it felt right. At the hospital later that afternoon, Ethan sat beside Leo as a nurse checked his vitals. Leo was unusually quiet, his eyes focused on a sticker chart on the wall. The doctor arrived, 15 minutes late, distracted, and barely looked Ethan in the eye. Standard tests, standard notes, standard caution about immune exposure risks. "You'll need to refill the immunoglobulin prescription," the doctor said, offhandedly flipping pages. Out of pockets about the same this time. Ethan nodded mechanically, masking the tightness in his chest. Afterward, while waiting in the hallway for the prescription printout, his phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello, Mr. Cole." The voice was smooth official. "This is Stanton Research Center. You've been referred for preliminary evaluation for the pediatric trial in immune therapy." Ethan froze. I didn't apply. There was a direct referral by name," the voice continued. "A Claire Easton. I know who she is," Ethan said, barely above a whisper. "We'll need your son's records. If all aligns, you'll be invited to our evaluation intake next week." Ethan ended the call slowly, the hallway spinning just slightly. Claire. She had done this. Silently. Without fanfare. He looked down at Leo, who was squinting at a vending machine filled with juices. "Dad," the boy said, tugging at his hand. "Can we get the grape kind this time?" Ethan crouched beside him, hand on his shoulder. "Buddy, we might be able to get something even better soon." Leo smiled as only a child could, believing without asking why. That night, Ethan stood in his apartment kitchen long after Leo had gone to sleep, fingers resting on the countertop. The quiet hummed around him. The refrigerator clicked on and off. He thought of the woman who had handed him a card without strings. The woman who saw more than a technician, more than a single dad with too many tired miles in his eyes. She had opened a door without asking him to prove his worth. He wanted to call her. He didn't. At the Easton Grand, Claire sat in her office with the lights dimmed, staring out at the skyline. She'd kept her promise. Quietly. It wasn't about being seen. It was about making sure someone else didn't feel invisible anymore. There was a knock. Mr. Howard, the building's head of security, a gruff man in his 60s who rarely knocked, peeked in. "Evening, ma'am. Just wanted to let you know we had a few guests ask who handled the power outage yesterday. Said someone spoke to their kids in their native tongue, calmed them down." Claire looked up. "They're asking for a name to write in the guest commendation." "Give them one," she said, a soft smile playing on her lips. "Ethan Cole." Howard nodded, then paused. "You know, a man like that don't come around often. Most folks go their whole careers never meeting someone like him." Claire met his eyes. "Yes," she said. "I know." He hesitated again, then stepped in and handed her a small envelope. "Found this. Think it's yours." It was her business card, the one she'd given Ethan. Now returned, with something scribbled on the back. "Thank you for seeing what no one else did." Claire held the card in her hand for a long time, her fingers trembling just slightly. She wasn't used to being thanked. She wasn't used to feeling this much. But tonight she wasn't the CEO behind the glass office. She was just a woman, sitting alone, holding a note from a man who, without even realizing it, had reminded her of who she used to be before power, before performance. Someone who still believed in good things, quiet things, real things. The lobby of the Easton Grand was unusually quiet for a Thursday morning. The fountain in the center gurgled softly, and sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting geometric patterns onto the tile floor. Ethan stood just outside the staff lounge holding his time card. It was supposed to be just another check-in, but something about the atmosphere felt off. A few employees walked by without meeting his eyes. Nina, the young receptionist he'd once helped during the AC meltdown, passed him with a polite but clipped smile. She usually waved, not today. He swiped his card, but the system returned an error. Access restricted. See supervisor. He frowned. He hadn't missed a shift. He hadn't violated protocol. What was going on? Upstairs, Claire was mid-meeting when her assistant Marissa leaned in with a whisper. There's been a staff issue. Ethan Cole tried to access the main floor this morning. His credentials were flagged. Claire's eyes narrowed. Why? Marissa hesitated. A system reclassification went through overnight. It came from HR, but the trigger wasn't from you. Claire stood ignoring the silence in the boardroom behind her. Put everything on hold. Now. Down in the lobby, Ethan had just stepped outside when the familiar figure of Mr. Howard, the longtime head of security, approached. "Hey, Ethan," the older man said, voice low. "Can I talk to you a sec?" Ethan gave a tired smile. "If you're about to tell me I'm being replaced by a robot, I already figured." Howard's mouth twitched. "Nothing like that. Not officially, anyway. But word's going around. Word. That someone's been leveraging connections, pulling strings. Some staff say you're cozying up to the CEO for special favors." Ethan's expression darkened. "She got my son into a trial that could save his life," he said, voice tight. "I didn't ask. She just did it." Howard looked at him evenly. "I know, and I believe you. But not everyone thinks with their hearts in the right place. Some of them think you're making a play. Climbing, using sympathy." Ethan turned his gaze to the windows, his shoulders stiff. "I didn't ask for attention," he muttered. "I just wanted to stay invisible and raise my kid." Howard laid a hand on his shoulder. "Son, I've been in this building longer than the elevators, and I know a good man when I see one. But I also know what jealousy sounds like. It doesn't whisper, it spreads." Ethan gave a tight nod. "Can I at least go back to work today?" Howard hesitated. "You'd need to clear that with HR." That was when Claire's voice cut through from behind them. "He doesn't need to clear anything." Both men turned. Claire stood just beyond the revolving doors, her coat still on wind in her hair. Her eyes were locked on Ethan's, steady and unflinching. Howard nodded and excused himself silently. Ethan looked at her. "They think I'm exploiting you." "I know," she replied, "and it's my fault." He blinked. "What?" Claire stepped closer. "I acted without transparency. I pulled a string because I believed in your worth, but I didn't protect you from how that would look. That's on me." He exhaled. "It was never about favors." "You know that, right?" "I do," she said softly. "But the people watching us, people who don't know your story, they see moments, not meaning." Ethan looked down. "So, what now?" "I fix it," she said simply. "The right way." That afternoon, Claire called an all-staff gathering, rare, unexpected, and unprecedented. The ballroom lights dimmed as employees filtered in. Ethan stood near the back, arms crossed, still unsure what was about to unfold. Claire stepped onto the small stage. No slides, no microphone. Just her. "I want to talk to you," she began, "about what matters in this building." The room quieted. Hotels are built on image, perfection, performance. But behind every 5-star review is a person you don't see. Someone mopping a hallway at 2 a.m. Someone fixing a broken thermostat so a child doesn't cry. Someone who speaks to guests in their own language, not because it's in the job description, but because they can. She paused, letting the words settle. "I want to tell you about a man who gave up a career in academia to take a job here not for money, not for glory, but because his son needed him more than a title ever could." Murmurs, recognition, eyes turning toward Ethan. That man is Ethan Cole, and the only favor he's ever asked is for a shot at doing the right thing, over and over again. Ethan froze as the room turned toward him. Claire stepped off the stage and walked to him. In front of everyone, she looked him in the eye. If anyone here deserves a promotion, deserves a title, it's the person who reminds us that the heart of hospitality isn't marble or menus. It's humanity. She turned to the crowd. Effective immediately, Ethan will lead our new guest empathy and cultural outreach initiative. It's a role we created not out of formality but because we believe people still matter more than machines. Applause started slowly, then built, then filled the room. Ethan stood stunned. But in his chest, something cracked open, not pride, but purpose. Later that night, as he tucked Leo into bed, the boy looked up at him with sleepy eyes. "Dad, are you famous now?" Ethan smiled. "No, buddy. But people heard my story today. That's enough." Leo yawned. "Are they going to hear mine too?" Ethan kissed his forehead. "They already are." The lobby looked different at night. Not because the lights were dimmer or because the music from the grand piano had faded into memory. No, it was the emptiness. The way a space built for noise and movement could suddenly feel like a memory frozen in marble. Claire stood alone near the concierge desk, arms crossed, her reflection caught in the lobby's polished floors. It had been hours since the staff gathering, but the applause still rang faintly in her ears. Not because it was loud, but because it felt real. And yet, something gnawed at her. She glanced at her phone. No new messages. Not from Ethan. She told herself he probably needed space, that stepping into the spotlight wasn't easy for someone who had learned to survive in the shadows. But deep down she feared something else, that by bringing him into the light she had shattered the fragile boundary of trust they'd spent weeks building. People don't stay when you put them on a stage. They run. She knew that. She had lived it. The next day, Ethan didn't show up for his new orientation meeting. HR called him. No answer. Marissa tried emailing. No reply. By noon, Claire left her office and took the elevator to the lower level herself. She walked past the maintenance bay, past the storage rooms, past the old break room with the squeaky vending machine. But Ethan's locker was empty. Everything, his tools, his gloves, even the small photo of Leo taped inside the door, gone. She stood there for a long time, unmoving. Then she turned eyes burning and walked back upstairs. That evening, Claire visited the hospital. Leo wasn't there. Neither was Ethan. The front desk confirmed Leo had been moved off the trial intake list. The appointment had been canceled. No reason given. No follow-up. She stood outside in the cold spring air, feeling as if the wind was trying to scrape something off her skin. Was this his way of walking out quietly, of refusing what looked too much like charity? She pulled her phone from her coat pocket and stared at his name on the screen. Her thumb hovered. She didn't press it. Didn't. Back at the Easton Grand. Mr. Howard, the old security chief, sat in his cramped office finishing a lukewarm cup of coffee when he noticed something odd on the camera feed, Claire alone descending into the employee basement. Again. He sighed. A minute later, someone knocked on his door. It was Nina. She looked nervous. I think I messed something up," she said, voice low. Howard raised an eyebrow. "Go on." "I overheard Ethan thanking Claire after that hospital trial call. He didn't say much, just something about how she'd helped him without asking for anything in return." Howard nodded slowly. "And I told HR," Nina admitted. "Not to cause trouble, just—" She hesitated. "Just because I didn't know how to read it. And then people started whispering, and I didn't stop it." Howard leaned back, folding his arms. "Why tell me now? Because he's gone. And I didn't think he'd leave." Howard was quiet for a long time. Then he reached into the drawer and pulled out a small envelope. "He left this with me. Said I'd know the right time to give it to her." Nina frowned. "To Claire." "No," Howard said. "To you." Nina blinked. "Me?" Howard slid it across the desk. She opened it slowly. Inside was a short note in Ethan's handwriting. "We all carry the weight of what we don't understand. But the good news is we can always learn. No grudge, just hope." Anina pressed her lips together, tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. "I didn't deserve that," she whispered. "None of us do," Howard said gently. "That's why it matters." Hours later, Claire stood on the rooftop terrace of the hotel, the city glowing beneath her. The wind was sharp, but she didn't feel it. This had been their place once, just for one evening. A place where two people who had nothing in common except everything that mattered had stood side by side and spoken like old friends. And now... silence. She closed her eyes. Maybe she had misjudged. Maybe Ethan wasn't ready. Or maybe the world had simply pushed too hard too fast. Not every good thing survives the light. Still, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the business card he had returned, the one he'd scribbled his thanks on. She turned it over in her hand like a talisman. And then, suddenly, a thought. She ran back inside. The next morning, Claire went to Leo's school. She waited outside, standing among tired parents and guardians. The morning bell rang, and the flow of children poured toward the entrance. She watched, and finally she saw him. Leo, wearing that same red NASA cap holding his father's hand. Claire stepped forward. Ethan saw her at the same moment. Their eyes met. He froze. Leo looked up at him, then back at her, curious. Dad Claire walked slowly toward them, heart-pounding, unsure what to say. But when she reached them, she didn't speak to Ethan first. She knelt beside Leo. "I was afraid I broke something important," she said softly. "But I didn't mean to." Leo tilted his head. "Are you sad?" She smiled gently. "A little. Then Dad probably is too." Claire looked up at Ethan, eyes shimmering. "Why did you leave?" Ethan's voice was steady but quiet. "Because I wasn't sure if I still belonged. I'm not used to being someone people talk about." She stood slowly. "You weren't someone we were talking about, Ethan. You were someone we were learning from." Silence. Then Leo tugged his dad's arm. "Can she come with us to breakfast?" Ethan looked at Claire. "Do you want to?" Claire nodded. "More than you know." And just like that, the silence between them began to dissolve, not with grand speeches or apologies, but with the quiet trust of a boy who saw the truth before either of them did. The early morning light filtered through the high windows of the Easton Grand's lower level, casting long stripes of gold across the concrete floor. Mr. Howard moved slowly through the corridor keys, jingling at his side, clipboard in hand. It was quiet this time of day before the hum of guests, before the clatter of room service trays and bell carts. Just the building breathing. He paused outside the old maintenance locker room. Something tugged at him. It wasn't the usual instinct, the kind forged from decades in security, always sensing trouble before it surfaced. No, this was different. It felt like memory. He reached for the key, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. There, taped to the inside of locker G17. Ethan's locker was an envelope. Simple, unmarked, but he knew it hadn't been there yesterday. Howard pulled it off the metal, gently opened the flap, and found a folded piece of paper inside. Not typed, handwritten. Neat, steady script. And across the top, in 7 languages, the same sentence repeated. Sometimes the quietest voices carry the greatest truths. Below it, a letter, addressed to Claire. That same morning, Claire sat in her office, staring at her untouched coffee. Her calendar was filled with meetings she had no intention of attending. She kept thinking about Ethan's face outside the school, guarded, but not cold. A man, still willing to listen. She wondered what he'd say now. If he'd forgive her, if she had done enough to earn that. The chime of her intercom startled her. Ms. Easton Marissa's voice came through. "Mr. Howard's here. He says it's important. Send him in." Howard entered quietly, hat in hand, envelope held delicately between 2 fingers like a relic. He left this, he said, sometime in the night. Claire took it silently. Howard didn't linger. She opened the letter and unfolded the page slowly, almost reverently. Claire. By now, you've probably guessed that disappearing wasn't about the job. It was about the noise. The way kindness sometimes echoes louder than silence, and not everyone knows how to live with that. I didn't. I've spent years shrinking, trying not to draw attention, trying to keep Leo safe, trying to carry this life in both hands without letting it spill. And then you saw me. Not the role, not the resume. Me. You didn't just hold the door. You walked through it first so I wouldn't be afraid to follow. And that scared me more than anything, because no one had ever done that before. But this isn't a goodbye. It's a pause, a deep breath, a place between chapters. Leo needs to see the world not just through my lens, but through yours too, the part of you that believes in people, that fights for them. And when he's old enough to understand everything that happened, he'll know that you were the one who reminded his father how to stand tall again. Until then, if you ever need me, look for the one speaking softly in the corner, in a language only the heart understands. Ethan Claire read the letter 3 times. By the end, her hands were trembling. Not with regret, with clarity. She rose, smoothed her blazer, and walked out of her office with purpose. 2 hours later, Claire entered a small bookstore cafe on the Lower East Side, a spot Ethan had once mentioned in passing. Best second-hand books and even better cinnamon rolls, he'd said. She stepped inside and saw him instantly. Not behind the counter. Not with Leo. Just sitting near the back, a coffee in one hand, a notebook open in front of him, pen moving steadily across the page. The same way he probably wrote that letter. He looked up. Their eyes met. And for a moment, neither moved. Then Ethan smiled gently without surprise, as if he'd been waiting for her all along. Claire walked over and sat across from him without a word. She placed the letter on the table between them, then laid her hand beside it, not reaching for his not expecting. Just there. Ethan closed his notebook and exhaled softly. You got it. She nodded. I needed to hear it. He studied her face, the softness in her eyes. I wasn't sure you'd come. Claire smiled. You signed it until then. Not? Goodbye. That gave me just enough space to hope. A quiet settled between them, not awkward, not distant. The kind of quiet that spoke volumes. The kind where healing lives. After a moment, Ethan asked, Do you still think I should lead that outreach program? Claire tilted her head. No. His brow lifted, surprised. I think you should build it, she continued. From scratch. In your voice. In your way. Not because it saves your job, but because it might save the heart of this place. Ethan stared at her. I've already drawn up a proposal, she said, sliding a printed folder onto the table. But only if you say yes. He opened it. Read the title, Human First, the Empathy Initiative underneath it. A simple subline, curated by Ethan Cole. Later, as they walked outside into the spring air, Claire glanced up at the brightening sky. Leo came running around the corner, a science book in one hand, the red NASA cap bouncing on his head. Dad, Miss Claire, he shouted. Guess what? Pluto might be a planet again. They both laughed. As Leo grabbed Ethan's hand, Claire looked at them, the boy who carried the future and the man who had chosen love over legacy. And in that moment she knew something for certain. Not all heroes make speeches. Some just fix what's broken quietly, patiently until it works again. The Easton Grand buzzed with nervous energy. It was the 15th anniversary of the hotel's flagship opening, a landmark event for the company and a personal milestone for Claire. The grand ballroom had been transformed into an elegant showcase of the brand's history and future velvet-draped tables, shimmering chandeliers, a stage framed by LED panels scrolling the hotel's timeline. Every executive from the Easton chain had flown in. Clients, press, city officials all seated at circular tables, glasses clinking with champagne. It was the kind of night Claire used to thrive in, dignified, structured, strategically illuminated. But tonight, as she stood backstage adjusting the microphone clipped to her collar, Claire felt something new. A pulse beneath the polish. A story waiting to be told. Across the room, Ethan stood near the entrance, hands clasped in front of him. He wasn't wearing a uniform tonight. He wore a clean gray suit and a black tie, the kind that had clearly been worn before weddings or funerals, but tonight it carried none of that weight. Leo stood next to him, dressed in a little blazer and sneakers practically vibrating with excitement. "Dad," he whispered, tugging Ethan's hand. "Are there famous people here?" Ethan smiled. "There's someone more important than that. People who remember what it feels like to be seen." Leo nodded solemnly as if that were more impressive than any movie star. Claire stepped onto the stage. The ballroom hushed. Spotlights shifted to her, casting her in that familiar pool of light, the one she used to command like a second skin. But tonight, she didn't feel like a CEO stepping into her kingdom. She felt like a person speaking to other people. And that made all the difference. "Good evening," she began. "Tonight we celebrate 15 years of excellence. But I want to begin by telling you a story, one that doesn't appear in any of our press releases." A pause. Every eye followed her, even the ones who were skeptical. A few weeks ago, a technician at this hotel fixed an AC unit during a critical guest incident. You might say that's routine. But what he did next wasn't. She glanced toward the far side of the room, caught Ethan's gaze. He spoke 7 languages to calm guests from 7 countries, not because it was his job, but because he could, because he saw panic and answered it with presence. A quiet wave moved through the crowd. Claire continued, "I found out later that he had once been a professor, that he gave up academia when his son got sick, that he took a night job no one notices, so he could be the kind of father most kids never get to see." She paused, letting the words breathe. "In our world, we reward what's visible. Titles, sales, metrics. But sometimes the people holding us together are the ones who never step into the spotlight. Until now." Claire stepped down from the stage. The lights followed her as she walked to the edge of the ballroom where Ethan stood frozen. She took a slow breath. "Ethan Cole," she said, voice clear but soft. "This hotel would not be what it is without you." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "And I wouldn't be who I am now if I hadn't met you." Ethan stared at her stunned. Claire extended her hand, not to pull him forward, not to place him in the spotlight, just to meet him. Ethan reached for it. Their hands met in the space between noise and silence. And in that small gesture, the room felt something shift, not upward, but inward. Claire turned back to the audience. This is what real hospitality looks like. It's not marble floors or thread counts. It's choosing kindness when no one's watching. It's listening in a language someone didn't expect you to understand. Applause started slowly, then grew. Louder, fuller, real. Claire looked at Ethan, then at Leo, who had pressed both palms to his mouth in pure awe, eyes wide as saucers. Tears burned behind Claire's eyes, but she held steady. For once, she wasn't performing. She was just telling the truth. After the event, guests milled around, eager to meet the man behind the story. Ethan shook hands awkwardly, signed a few programs, answered questions with quiet humility. Claire found Leo standing alone near the dessert table, staring at a cake shaped like the hotel itself. "It's very square," he said. Claire laughed. "You're not wrong." He turned to her. "You made my dad happy again." She crouched beside him. No, sweetheart. He was already whole. He just needed someone to remind him. Leo considered this. That's like when the moon looks broken, but it's still there just hiding. Claire's throat tightened. Exactly like that. Later, as the crowd thinned, Ethan found her standing on the terrace outside the ballroom, city lights glittering below. "I wasn't ready for that," he said, coming beside her. "Me either," she admitted. They stood in silence. "Are you still scared?" he asked gently. Claire exhaled. "Every day. But today, it didn't stop me." He nodded, then looked at her with that quiet certainty that needed no decoration. What if he asked this wasn't the ending? She smiled. "It's not." He glanced at the hotel behind them. "And what comes next?" Claire turned to him, her voice sure. "We build something better. Not just a new department, but a different way of leading, a different way of loving." Ethan took her hand. This time she didn't hesitate. Leo's laugh echoed behind them as he raced across the ballroom floor toward the piano. Ethan looked at her and said, "It feels like the beginning." Claire nodded. "It is." A year later, spring returned to New York, quietly without grand announcements, just the subtle shift of light in the afternoons, the soft scent of blossoms threading through the breeze and the hum of the Easton Grand, resuming its quiet rhythm. But inside the hotel, something had changed. Not in the marble floors or the gold-plated elevators. Those were still there, still polished, still perfect. The real change lived in the people, the way they greeted each other in the hallways, the way they listened more closely, paused longer before speaking. It lived in a program now known across the entire Easton chain, the Empathy Initiative. And at the heart of it was a man who once worked underground, tightening bolts in silence. Now he stood in a sunlit conference room teaching front desk trainees how to say, "I'm here to help" in 6 languages, and how to mean it in all of them. Ethan Cole stood by the whiteboard, a marker in one hand, his sleeves rolled to his elbows. Behind him, a dozen new hires from all over the country leaned forward in their seats, not because he demanded it, but because his presence invited it. "Hospitality," he said, "drawing a circle isn't about perfection. It's about presence. It's what happens when someone walks through our doors carrying a story and we meet them in it." He looked out at the room. You don't need to speak 7 languages to make someone feel seen, but you do need to listen like you would if you did. The class nodded slowly, letting his words settle. From the doorway, Claire watched arms folded across her chest, pride swelling in the quiet place behind her ribs. This was the vision that had once only lived in the margins of her heart. Now it was a living thing, walking and breathing in the hands of the man beside her. She stepped into the room as Ethan dismissed the class. The trainees filed out with notebooks, questions, and a sense that maybe, just maybe, they were about to do something meaningful with their careers. Ethan turned to her with a soft smile. "You didn't have to sneak in." Claire returned the smile. "I like hearing you talk when you forget people are watching." He tilted his head. "Is that why you never interrupt? I'm afraid if I speak," she teased, "I'll forget how to listen." Ethan laughed. "You're better at it than you think." She walked to the table where a stack of pamphlets sat, the new version of Easton's hospitality training materials, each one bearing his name. "You ever think you'd be doing this?" she asked. "Every now and then," Ethan said, "when I wasn't too tired to dream." He looked out the window. "Sometimes I still expect to be under a stairwell with a wrench, wondering if I made a mistake giving up my career." Claire stepped beside him. "And what do you think now?" Ethan looked at her. I never gave anything up. I just took a longer route to something better." That afternoon, the 3 of them sat outside the little corner diner, Ethan, Claire, and Leo sharing a plate of fries and milkshakes as sunlight bathed the sidewalk in gold. Leo was now 11, a little taller, his cheeks a little slimmer, his eyes still bright as stars. He wore a blue cap now instead of red. Space was still his passion, but he'd recently added architecture to the list. "I'm going to build a hotel that floats in orbit," he declared between sips. "Every room will have a telescope and 0 gravity beds." Ethan grinned. "Sounds like you'll need a good engineer." Claire winked. "And a really patient CEO." Leo nodded. "I already have both." They all laughed. Then Leo leaned back, sighing contentedly. This is my favorite part of the week." Claire glanced at Ethan. "Mine too," he said softly. The moment lingered warm, whole, unforced. No one needed to say what was growing between them. It had already taken root. In shared silences. In everyday kindnesses. In Friday milkshakes and rooftop glances and the way they reached for each other without thinking now. Love had arrived quietly, without fanfare, without declarations. But it was here. That evening, back at the Easton Grand, Claire stood beside Ethan in the staff lounge-turned-training suite. She held a folder in her hand, a proposal she'd been quietly building for months. She handed it to him. "What's this?" he asked. "A scholarship," she said, "for hospitality students with family hardships. In your name." Ethan opened it, reading the mission statement. At the bottom, her signature. Next to it, space for his. "I thought we could launch it together," she said, "for the ones who were never seen." Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, not as a CEO, not as the woman who helped his son, not even as the person who once pulled him from the edge of invisibility, but as a partner. "You keep doing this," he said, "doing what speaking to people the way no textbook ever taught." Claire smiled. "You taught me that." He pulled a pen from his pocket, signed his name next to hers, and closed the folder. That night, after Leo was asleep, Ethan and Claire stood on the rooftop once more. The city shimmered below them, 1,000 lights blinking like distant stars. No one else was there. They didn't need to speak. Not tonight. Instead, they simply stood, hands intertwined, faces tilted toward the sky. And in the hush between words and the comfort of a shared stillness, they both understood. The most powerful language was the one they had built together. Word by word, step by step. Love not as a performance, but as a quiet, everyday promise. We'd love to know, where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. It always warms our hearts to see how far these stories travel. If this story touched you, consider subscribing to the channel so you won't miss the next one. We're building a community that believes in kindness, healing, and hope, and you're a part of that. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, take care and keep believing in the quiet power of love.